Hello, everybody. So we're going to take a look at this is one of our last lectures here. We're going to start to take a look at one of the final obstacles that we've been looking at and sort of see how it fits in with the rest of our discussion this semester. So overall, we've been taking a look at major social obstacles in relationships. So one of the things we've emphasized throughout the term has been the importance of the social and what we do with each other. So we'll get to these pictures in a second. But the social being the context that we take, that we have relationships in. So it's not just about person one or person two, it's about the context that we're in. So in this process of investigating social obstacles, we've explored the influence of institutions and how they could impact relationships. We even noted how specifically class and gender are major identities that are reinforced through society to make an impact on day-to-day relationships. So one of the important things we got out of yesterday's or last lecture was the idea that even though an individual may not harbor these feelings, such as racism, sexism, or classism, if the society itself is supportive of these ideas, the individual always has to consider them. So take a look here at our previous example. So this is along gender lines. So we've taken a look at patriarchy in several senses, and again, that's a hierarchical structure where masculine is inherently more important or valuable than feminine. And one of the things we took a look at here then is the social context. So if in here, equal, if this individual, person one, has the idea of equality in their mind, and that's what they believe in, their relationship is still going to be affected because the broader social context, society itself, is built on patriarchy. Patriarchy, the hierarchy of masculine being more important than feminine. So in some senses, of course, the individual perspective is going to be important, but it has to be considered within the context. So even if both these people are thinking about equality, the relationship out here in the middle that's taking place in society is still going to be influenced by the dynamics there. So even if person one does not harbor ideas of gender inequality, does not believe one gender is superior to the other, the context is still going to have to be considered because in the United States now and in many other parts of the world, we still have gender hierarchies. And similarly, along race identities, there's a similar idea. So even if this individual here in their relationship believes in equality, person one and person two, the social structure itself, American society right now, is structured on racism or in particular white supremacy. And in this hierarchy, like the gender one, in this case whiteness is more valuable than non-whiteness. So there's a hierarchy here. And again, this is socially constructed, meaning that this isn't natural, but this is something that society has. So we could have two individuals that believe in equality, but the social context is going to matter. So let's take a look a little bit more then. So we're going to take a look a little bit more deeply into the racial hierarchy and the origins of it to frame it and how it might affect our interpersonal relationships. So take a look back at history a little bit. So racial hierarchies. We're going to take a look at two people here, Howard Zinn and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. So both of these authors are professors and historians, and they highlight different aspects of race in the United States. So Howard Zinn is an American historian who studied history from the perspective of the common person. He's most famous for the book People's History of the United States. And the reason this is interesting is because rather than talking about history from the perspective of presidents, elected officials, rulers, and the wealthy, he takes a look at it from the perspective of the common person, the worker, the woman, the indigenous person. And from these perspectives, you get a completely different feel for American history. And a part of that experience then, he argued that race was founded in the United States as a part of colonialization. The earliest separation between black and white, or between indigenous and non-indigenous, came as a part of creating a racial hierarchy. So the racial hierarchy that we looked before, white and non-white, whiteness Howard Zinn would argue that whiteness itself was created as a part of developing this hierarchy, where it largely did not exist. There wasn't much of a designation in the earliest days of the settlement of the United States between white and non-white, in the sense that often class was more of something that people identified with, where indentured servants would be working right alongside with other indentured servants, regardless of what color they were. And as these folks began to resist their conditions, there came to be a moment where race was developed along these lines to preserve the social structure. Later, Howard Zinn would argue that this eventually began to fuel capitalism. So I'll have a picture down here that describes that. So as we said in the previous lecture, the goal of the boss or owner is to pay the lowest wages possible. Therefore, these hierarchical divisions, between, in this case race, can help maintain lower wages. So in this case, if we have two people, a white person and a non-white person, and these are workers, and this is the boss. If the boss can create a division between these two people, between these two types of people, along their identities, he could have them compete with each other, just like anything in the market. And one group might say, I'll work for this wage, and the other group's going to argue further and further down. So it keeps wages and pay low, and the boss ends up succeeding in making more profit, is a very general way of looking at it. So later, Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, whose book, take a look here, is From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. Her recent book came out a few years ago. Took a look at similar ideas, and like Silvia Federici, she noted that these initial divisions at the founding, so if we had a timeline here, so U.S. started, U.S. was started here, and we come to current day. If this hierarchy of race was created in the starting of the U.S., it became while started intentionally to keep wages low or to maintain power, over time it becomes to seem natural, like the gender inequality that Silvia Federici was talking about. All of a sudden, this white non-white division seems, I'm going to put it in quotes, natural, because it's been such a long part of our history. So it's been such a long part of our history. And because it's been such a long part of our history, we forget that it actually was started somewhere. And so over time, these original hierarchies become less and less clear as we move forward. So as we start thinking about these things then, how does this affect relationships? So how does this affect relationships? So in our discussion, I'm going to show a video real quick after this. But where is race most present in our society? So we're going to explore some ideas that Howard Zinn and Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor came up with, and think about where it's most present in society and how it could challenge relationships. So let's take a look at a video about an interracial relationship.
10 years.
When I look at her, I don't look at her, as a white woman. That's the love of my life,
He's black, she's white.
There has been a few extended family members that have made comments that kind of rubbed me the wrong way on both sides of our family.
But most of the people close to them have been supportive.
It wasn't so much our families, it was the outside people that didn't know him to know his heart, his soul, and probably the same for me. And we still get that more than we would like from, strangers.
Doc says there's a certain look they get all the time.
You might be walking in the store and we may hold hands and you might see somebody just give us, an awkward look or but we know that look well too often, so we know what it means.
And Ashley says she gets it in her Facebook messages when she talks about her mixed family.
You know, you're an abomination for being with a black man, and you bring kids into this world, and that's wrong.
Before they were together.
And I would make a post like, oh, why is everything about race?
But over the years, she says she's gotten to see a side of race in America that she never experienced firsthand as a white woman.
I mean, there's been several times, you know, he's tried to return something for me at Walmart, and they give him a hard time if he didn't have the receipt. And I will take that same item back. Literally, he walks to the car, gives it to me, I go right back in, and I come out, and no problem whatsoever.
And then there was the time he got pulled over and had guns pulled on him for an expired tag.
But it was completely ridiculous, and I promise you, as soon as I pulled up there and I said, this is my husband, everyone left but 2 cops.
According to the Pew Research Center, 3% of married couples in America were interracial in 1967. That's the year laws banning interracial marriage were declared unconstitutional. It was 10% as of 2015. And trending up. That number for newlyweds, well, it's 17%. And nearly 40% of adults say the growing number is good for society. That's up from 24% in 2010.
And I've had plenty of times where I've had people tell me, you know, black and white people aren't supposed to be together, you know. That's just...
You're not supposed to mix.
Then they'll say, that's the way I was raised. Well, that's the way you was raised. It's not the way I was raised. The way I was raised is to love everybody and treat everybody equal.
And that's how they're raising their children, who they say are sometimes a little confused about where they fit. And they tackle the race conversation together.
Certain parts of the conversation that I can explain more about than she can, me being a black man, you know. But it's mostly something we usually tackle together, and just it's basically letting our kids know that you can't let racism bother you. You can't let it dictate who you want to be or where you want to go.
We're raising the next generation. So my hope and prayer is that when they have kids, they're going to teach their kids everything about race that we have taught them.
Yeah, and in my heart, I feel like this generation, as far as our kids, I feel like we will see less racism.
They believe there's a lot the country can learn from the growing number of relationships that are like theirs.
Anybody that's in an interracial relationship is the definition of this thing can work between black and whites, you know, coexisting together.
In black and white.
There's always room for change.
Okay, so with a specific example in mind from the video, or examples in your own life, or in general, where do we see race most present in our society, and how might it affect relationships? So we had a specific example there of how it affected theirs. How does this change our context of relating with each other? Again, as we relate with each other, we always have to think of the social context. And the example, the partners each individually were not harboring racist ideas, but the social context affected that. How do we mitigate that problem? How do we think through that problem? And when you're thinking about this, it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It could be any sort of relationship, right? So thinking back what we talked about with Howard Zinn and Keeanga Yamada Taylor, how do we understand the origin of race in the United States? We discussed how race intersects with class, but how might it intersect with other identities? How does race intersect with gender, ability, being a student, etc.? And again, how might the hierarchy of race affect relationships? How might race affect relationships even though both partners believe in equality? Or both people believe in equality? Getting back to this social context. And finally, how might racial hierarchies affect children, siblings of the couple, or of the friendship, or of the dynamic? So thinking through these things, how does race affect us and affect our relationships?